Hello, friends. Are you watching this alone or with someone? Tell me in the comments.
The year I turned 42, my birthday passed just like the last one. A regular Tuesday on the calendar, a forgettable tick on the to-do list of life. No call from my parents, not even a text, not a single voicemail saying, "Hey Jess, we love you. Hope you're doing something special." The silence wasn't shocking anymore. It had hardened into routine, like a sore tooth you learn to chew around. I woke up early that day because I always do. Habits drilled into me from the corporate world where I'd built my life alone, brick by brick, with no family scaffolding holding me up. I scrolled through emails, cleared out spam, ignored the happy birthday discount from a skincare brand I don't even use anymore. And then I opened Instagram. That's when the punch hit. A selfie of my parents standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, both smiling like retirees who'd finally started living. The caption read, "Surprising our baby boy Brad for his 30th in Paris." He had no idea. Beneath it, a stream of comments from their country club friends, from extended family I hadn't heard from in years, even from my old babysitter, all full of hearts and praise and, "Aw, so lucky." The photo wasn't even 24 hours old. They were still there. Brad was tagged, wearing a cashmere scarf, probably from the Burberry store just off the Champs-Élysées. And I sat there, alone in my kitchen in upstate New York, eating oatmeal out of a chipped mug with a spoon. I bent doing dishes 6 months ago. They had remembered Brad's birthday. In fact, they'd orchestrated an international surprise for it. And mine? Nothing, not even a generic Facebook post. It's not like I needed a trip to Europe. I didn't even need cake. But I think I needed to matter, at least as much as a plane ticket. See, this wasn't new. Brad had always been the golden boy. He was the kind of kid who could crash a bike into a mailbox and somehow get congratulated for learning physics the hard way. I was the responsible one, which is a polite way to say I was the family's emotional airbag. If things got tense, if bills were late, if mom needed someone to talk to when dad was being a cold statue of a man, they'd call me. But if something good happened, Brad. Always Brad. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I had outgrown this need for recognition, for validation, for something as infantile as birthday fairness. I told myself that I was successful, that I owned a house, that I had clients who respected me, and a garden I'd actually kept alive for 2 years running. But there's something uniquely cruel about being forgotten by the people who brought you into the world, as if your existence only matters when it's convenient for their narrative. That night, instead of crying or calling a friend, I opened a browser tab and typed private island rentals for one. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to do something so out of character, so absurdly indulgent, that I could remind myself I wasn't just here to fill other people's silences. I scrolled past the obvious honeymoon spots, past the luxury party islands filled with influencers and protein shakes, and landed on a listing for a quiet little place in Belize. It wasn't huge, maybe 4 acres, with a single cabin, a deck that faced the sunset, and a chef you could request if you didn't feel like cooking. The price made me laugh. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't insane either. I had enough saved. I clicked book now. I chose 5 nights. I didn't tell anyone. And that, I think, is where everything shifted. Not because I planned revenge, but because I stopped asking for permission to be seen. 2 weeks later, I boarded a small plane that landed on a dirt runway, then took a boat with a captain named Raoul, who had a scar over his left eye, and a playlist full of 80s rock ballads. When we pulled up to the island, it was just like the pictures. Quiet, warm, completely detached from the rest of the world. No expectations, no guilt, no family drama hovering like smoke. Just me and the sound of water lapping at the sand, as if the earth itself was saying, "You're allowed to be here." That first night, as the sky turned from gold to blood orange, I stood on the deck and took a single photo of the sun setting behind a jagged line of palms. I posted it with a caption that wasn't meant for anyone, but somehow said everything. Some people celebrate you only when you disappear. I closed the app and poured myself a drink. And I swear to God, by the time I took my first sip, my phone had already started buzzing. Now tell me this. When you've spent your whole life being ignored, what do you do when they finally notice your absence? Do you let them back in, or do you show them how it feels to be shut out? Let's just say I had time to think. I didn't even hear the first notification. The waves were louder, steadier, and for the first time in years, I had finally allowed myself to go completely still. No calls to return, no emails to answer, no sorry I forgot your birthday, but texts to politely downplay. I had my feet in the sand, a sweating glass of rum beside me, and a paperback novel open to page 1. A novel I wouldn't read, because even as I tried to unplug, part of me was waiting, not for them to care, not consciously, but for something in the universe to respond to the quiet rebellion I'd just initiated. And then it started. One ding, then another, then a vibration so constant it felt like my phone was shivering in fear. By the time I picked it up, I already knew. The photo had landed exactly where I wanted it to. No hashtags, no geotag. Just the caption, "Some people celebrate you only when you disappear." That was all it took to blow up a lifetime of neglect. The first message was from my mother, which surprised me only because I figured she wouldn't see it until at least a day later, after a wine tasting or a boutique tour with Brad. But there it was, "Jessica, what is going on? Where are you? Are you okay?" That was followed by a second, less composed line. "You can't just vanish and post cryptic things like that. It's hurtful." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so damn predictable, that the only time she'd be upset was when she didn't know how to control the narrative. Not when she forgot my birthday, not when she booked a French getaway for the child she still coddled like a newborn. But when I posted a sunset with an attitude, that's when it became a crisis. Then came Brad. "Sis, you good?" That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a 3-word sentence wrapped in the passive aggression of someone who knows he'll never have to face consequences. I didn't answer. I let him stew. I let all of them stew. Because when you've been ignored long enough, silence becomes a power you didn't know you had. It makes people squirm. It forces them to fill in the blanks you used to explain away for them, and they hate that. As I scrolled, more names appeared. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since Grandma's funeral, old coworkers I barely remembered, even my ex-boyfriend Daniel, who had ghosted me after our 5-year relationship fizzled into thin air like a cheap candle. "Hey, saw your post, you okay?" That one nearly made me throw my phone into the ocean. Not because he cared, but because he thought he was entitled to care now. After disappearing without a word while I begged him for clarity he never offered. But the most surreal moment came about 20 minutes after the photo went live. My dad called, not texted, not emailed. He actually called. And let me be clear, my father doesn't call unless someone's dying, or unless there's a legal document that needs reviewing. I stared at the screen as it lit up with his name, a name that once made me feel proud, safe, grounded. Now it felt corporate, like being summoned to the HR office after a complaint. I didn't answer. I didn't even let it ring out. I rejected the call and turned my phone face down on the chair beside me. If he wanted to say something real, he could learn how to write it. But what hit me harder than all of it was what wasn't said. No one, not my mother, not Brad, not even my dad, said happy birthday. Not a single one of them. They saw the post, they saw the date, they saw the caption that screamed a decade of quiet pain. And still, it didn't register. Or worse, it did, and they just didn't care to acknowledge it. As if to admit they forgot would be more shameful than the forgetting itself. As the sun dipped lower, casting that golden glow that influencers spend thousands to fake, I sat back and let the glow wash over me. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just breathed. And for once, it felt like I was inhaling air made for me, the kind of breath that doesn't have to compete with someone else's louder voice. That night, as I ate grilled fish alone, by candlelight, served by a local named Tomas who didn't ask any questions, didn't offer any birthday wishes, didn't try to fill the silence, I thought about how strange it was to feel more at home with strangers than with your own blood. I picked up my phone once more before bed, scrolled through the texts again, and finally answered one. My mom. Why would you do this to us? She'd written earlier, as if my self-imposed absence was a betrayal instead of a reaction. And I replied, not with rage, not with sarcasm, but with a truth so bare it felt like slicing through skin. Do what? Exist? I hit send, turned my phone off, and slid it under the pillow like a secret. Because here's the thing about people who are used to you being quiet. The moment you start speaking, even in whispers, they panic. And when you stop explaining altogether, that's when they realize just how loud your silence really is. But this was just the beginning. The storm hadn't hit yet. They still thought they could guilt me back into place. They had no idea just how far I was willing to go to remind them that I was no longer theirs to ignore. It's a strange sensation, realizing that the people who raised you never actually saw you, not as a whole person with edges and ache and nuance, but as a placeholder for whatever role needed filling in that particular season of their lives. The quiet daughter when mom needed peace, the unpaid therapist when dad's voice grew too sharp, the solid one when Brad needed the spotlight all to himself, sitting on that island with the sound of the tide rolling in and the stars beginning to appear, one by one like shy children, peeking from behind curtains. I started to do something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years, not because I didn't want to, but because some doors, once opened, don't ever quite shut the same, Ken. I started taking inventory, not of what I packed. That part was easy. A few swimsuits, 2 books I'd never finish, enough sunscreen to shame a lifeguard, and a bottle of perfume I only ever wore on dates that mattered. No, this inventory was quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous. It was the slow unfolding of memories, the recollections I used to dismiss as not that big of a deal, because when you're raised on emotional scraps, you start to believe that crumbs are meals and silence is affection. The first memory that came, uninvited but clear as ever, was from the Christmas when I was 13. That weird middle space between being a kid and being invisible. Brad, 9 years old and beaming, tore open his gift to find the keys to a brand new mountain bike, glossy and blue with his name etched on a tiny plaque by the handlebars. Everyone clapped. Mom took pictures. Dad told him he'd earned it by doing well in school, which was ironic considering his report card had more C's than a mediocre sitcom. My turn came. I opened my package, neatly wrapped and far too light, to find a faux leather planner with tiny pastel tabs and a note from my mother that read, "You're so organized, honey. This will help you stay even more on track." I said thank you. I smiled for the photo, and I excused myself to the bathroom where I sat on the cold tile floor, not crying exactly, but just letting the weight of being overlooked press itself against my ribs until I couldn't breathe without it hurting. Then there was my college graduation, the only one in our family to go all the way through, and they didn't come. Not because of a medical emergency or some tragic misunderstanding, but because Dad had a tea time in Florida with a client he couldn't afford to disappoint, and Mom had already seen one graduation when Brad finished high school, as if my academic journey was a rerun of a show they'd already stopped watching. They sent flowers, not even roses, carnations, pink ones, probably picked by a secretary who didn't know my favorite color was green. Memory after memory came, each like a grain of salt on a wound I thought had scabbed over. There was the time Brad crashed Dad's car, and I took the blame because he was still on probation from a weed charge. No one talks about now. There was the Thanksgiving when I brought my girlfriend, my first serious relationship, and Mom insisted she sit at the kids' table while Brad's Tinder date was treated like royalty. There was the 4th of July cookout, where I handled the grilling, the cleanup, the guest list, the decorations. And somehow Brad got praise for bringing ice. And with every recollection, I began to understand something that hurt more than all of it combined. That they didn't forget my birthday, because they were busy or distracted or even because they were bad people. They forgot because somewhere along the line, I had stopped being real to them. I was a background character in the family movie, the one whose name might not even make it into the credits. So I did what any self-respecting woman with a Wi-Fi signal and a lifetime of invisible bruises would do. I replied to the messages, not all of them, just the ones that deserved answers. Mom's texts got replies that were laced with the same kind of sugar-coated venom she used on me as a child. "I'm glad you're so concerned now, Mom. Imagine how nice that would have felt 20 years ago." To Brad, I wrote simply, "If you have to ask if I'm okay, you already know I'm not. But you also know you don't really care, so let's skip the performance." Even Daniel, the ex, got a message. "I'm doing better than when I begged you to stay," which is to say, I'm breathing on my own again. But the most telling reaction came from my father. After reading my reply to Mom, which she no doubt forwarded to him in her usual, "Can you believe this" fashion, he sent me a text that said only this: "You're being dramatic again. Again." As if my hurt had an expiration date. As if emotional neglect had a statute of limitations. As if choosing solitude over performative family dinners made me unhinged. I stared at the words, reread them 3 times, and then, without hesitation, blocked his number. I didn't want to scream or make some dramatic announcement about boundaries. I just wanted silence, not the kind they weaponized against me, but the kind I chose for myself. The stars were fully out now, thick and blinding in a sky that hadn't been diluted by city lights. And I thought to myself, maybe this is what clarity feels like. Not rage, not even sadness, just finally seeing things for what they are, and not flinching away. I had taken inventory, and nothing in the emotional storage unit was worth salvaging, not anymore. By the 4th day on the island, the silence that once felt like a soft blanket, comforting, warm, weightless, had turned into something denser, something sharper at the edges, like a space that dared me to fill it with something meaningful or risk being swallowed by the weight of my own solitude. It wasn't loneliness exactly, because loneliness suggests an absence of people, and I wasn't yearning for company. I was just beginning to see the outlines of a new version of myself. A version that didn't need to be validated by people who only noticed my presence when I stepped far enough away for the absence to sting. And yet, despite my desire to stay untethered from their world, the messages kept coming. Not just from family now, but from acquaintances, distant relatives, people who'd watched from the sidelines for years and were now all of a sudden deeply invested in my mental health because I had dared to say something without saying anything at all. The comments on my photo grew by the hour. Some were short, superficial, predictable in that generic social media way. Gorgeous view, or jealous. But others, the ones that struck deeper, came from people who saw the undercurrent beneath the image and read the caption for what it was: a scream dressed as poetry. One woman, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since we were teenagers, messaged me saying, "Your post hit me harder than I expected." My mom did the same thing to me last year. And just like that, I realized how many women walk around with this hollow ache in their chest, trying to pretend it's just part of being the strong one, when really it's the result of years of being emotionally sidelined until our worth was only acknowledged when it became conspicuously absent. Back in the family group chat, which I hadn't contributed to in years, but had remained an out of some mix of guilt, inertia, and the lingering hope that one day I'd matter, the tone had shifted dramatically. My mother was no longer pleading. Now she was accusing, trying to spin the story, as if I had deliberately tried to embarrass her in front of everyone, which likely meant her book club, her Pilates instructor, and a few neighbors who scrolled past the post and made a mental note that Jessica finally cracked. My father hadn't attempted to re-engage since I blocked him, which told me more than any apology could. And Brad, dear Brad, was stuck somewhere between confusion and frustration, unsure how to react to a sister who was no longer playing her assigned role. I don't know what compelled me to answer his call when it finally came through, but something in me, curiosity maybe, or the need to test whether he could still twist my emotions into knots, made me swipe the screen and lift the phone to my ear. His voice was casual, almost bored, as if this whole thing was just another episode in the ongoing saga of just being too sensitive. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He asked where I was. I said, away. Then came the silence. He broke it first, saying, "You know Mom's freaking out. She thinks you're, having a breakdown or something." That's when I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly predictable. A breakdown? Brad, they forgot my birthday for the second year in a row. You got Paris. I got a fucking calendar reminder from my dentist. He paused. Then in a tone that straddled defensiveness and condescension, he said, "You always wanted to be the victim, Jess. You've been doing this since we were kids." And there it was. The sentence that flipped the axis of everything I thought I was holding back. It wasn't rage that surged through me. It wasn't even pain. It was clarity, brutal and cleansing, like ripping open a window in a smoke-filled room and realizing you hadn't actually been breathing for years. I let the silence sit, let it weigh on him. Then I said with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed the line for decades, "Tell Mom thanks for teaching me that silence is louder than screaming. I finally get it." I hung up. That night, I poured myself a drink, but not out of sadness, out of ritual. The island had become more than a retreat. It had become a mirror, reflecting back the woman I had buried under years of obligation, niceties, and bite-sized forgivenesses handed out to people who never once considered offering any in return. I sat on the deck as the wind picked up and the clouds shifted, covering parts of the moon like secrets too heavy to carry all at once. I thought about power, not the loud, domineering kind that people like my father wielded like a briefcase full of threats, but the quieter, more dangerous kind. The kind you claim when you stop asking others for permission to exist on your own terms. I didn't need them to feel sorry. I didn't need them to apologize. I needed them to understand that I was no longer a draft waiting for their edits. I was done being revised into someone more palatable. I was done pretending that being left out didn't leave bruises. I was done, period. And yet, just as I began to feel the first taste of peace creep into my bones, a new message came in. This one wasn't angry. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't from my parents at all. It was a photo sent by Brad, and it would change everything. When I opened the photo Brad had sent, I wasn't prepared for the weight of it, not because it was dramatic or damning, not because it revealed some new betrayal or twisted confession, but because it was so painfully innocent that it managed to cut deeper than any of the bitter exchanges we'd volleyed back and forth over the past few days. The image was a scanned piece of paper, wrinkled and slightly smudged, clearly pulled from an old box or a forgotten folder, something that had clearly been kept, but not recently seen. It was a birthday card, handmade with markers and stickers, the kind children make when they've learned that construction paper and tape are powerful tools for expressing things they don't yet have the language for. In my own unmistakable handwriting, uneven and oversized in purple ink, I'd written, "Happy 12th birthday, Brad. You're my best friend in the whole world. I'll always love you, even when you're a pain. Love, Jess." I stared at that line. "I'll always love you," and felt something uncomfortably human bloom in the center of my chest. It wasn't regret, not quite, and it wasn't nostalgia either. It was more like an ache, the kind you feel when you catch your reflection in a window and realize you've aged 10 years without noticing. That little girl, the one who wrote that note with her tongue pressed to the side of her cheek in concentration, who meant every word, who believed that the bond between siblings was made of unbreakable thread, had no idea that 30 years later, she'd be sitting alone on an island wondering if that love had been wasted on someone who never truly valued it. But it wasn't just about Brad. That photo, that goddamn innocent piece of paper, brought the whole house of memory crashing down around me. It reminded me of the summer nights we spent building pillow forts in the living room, of the times we made up secret languages, of the shared glances at the dinner table when Dad got too quiet and the air grew thick. We had been allies once. Maybe not equals, not emotionally, not in how we were treated, but we were tethered by the unique chaos of growing up under the same roof, of learning how to navigate the emotional minefield of a family, where love was rationed and silence was currency. And yet, somewhere along the line, the dynamic had shifted. Maybe it was when I started getting A's and he started skipping classes. Maybe it was when Mom began saying things like, "Be a good example." And I interpreted it as, "Be quiet about your needs." Maybe it was when I moved out and they stopped calling, assuming I was fine because I always had been. Brad didn't steal the spotlight. It was handed to him, slowly and repeatedly, like a trophy passed down in a family where attention is a zero-sum game. And I didn't protest. I made myself small, silent, manageable. I became the adult in the room at 16, and once you step into that role, no one ever thinks to ask if you're tired. As I looked at the photo again, I wondered, did he send it as an olive branch or a weapon? Was he trying to say, "Remember when you loved me?" Or was he reminding me that I once made promises I no longer intended to keep? The ambiguity of it gnawed at me. I couldn't tell if he wanted to reconnect or guilt me into submission, and the fact that I couldn't decipher the intent only reinforced how far apart we'd grown. We weren't allies anymore. We were relics of each other's childhoods, artifacts buried under decades of unspoken resentment. The waves were rougher that night, crashing against the shore with a kind of reckless rhythm that matched the unease churning inside me. I walked down to the edge of the water, barefoot, dress clinging to my thighs, salt sticking to my skin. I brought my phone with me, still unlocked, still glowing with the image of that birthday card. I sat down in the sand and typed a message, slowly, deliberately, each word selected with care. I do remember loving you. I also remember growing up and feeling like that love only ever flowed in one direction. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the send button, and then, just as deliberately, I deleted it. Some things don't need to be said, not because they aren't true, but because they are too true, too final, too sharp-edged, to be placed into the fragile vessel of a text message. Some things you have to carry quietly, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore but still itches when the rain comes. Instead, I opened the camera, turned the lens back toward the ocean, and framed a new photo. A single empty wooden chair facing the endless stretch of sea, with nothing in the frame but the chair, the water, and the horizon blurred by mist. I posted it without a caption. No cryptic words, no explanation. Just that single image, because by now I had realized that people will read into what they want, no matter how silent you stay. The likes came in within minutes. Comments too. Some people said it was peaceful. Others called it lonely. A few said it looked like freedom. All of them were right. And none of them were. I left the phone on the chair and walked away, barefoot through the wet sand, letting the surf catch my ankles and pull at the hem of my dress. I didn't know what would happen when I got back. If I'd returned to voicemails from people who suddenly wanted to understand me, or if the family would retreat into the fortress of their own self-righteousness, painting me as ungrateful, dramatic, difficult. I didn't care, because the point had never been to punish them. It was to free myself. And maybe, just maybe, that little girl with the purple marker could rest now, knowing that the love she gave wasn't wasted. It just had to evolve. Some endings don't need closure. They just need distance.